All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Alex Rinke, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Celonis. And I'm here with Rob Koplowitz, who is VP and Principal Analyst for Forrester, covering digital process automation, AI, and cognitive computing. So I wanted to start this webinar personally. Forrester they just release a report that I think did a very, very good job of answering key questions that many of you as customers and partners ask yourself around the topic of process mining. And I received amazing feedback from the report from our customer and partner base, from the whole ecosystem. And it puts this idea out of process mining as the compass for digital transformation, which really, really resonated for everybody I spoke to, and it's very practical on why and how to use it and to apply process mining. We're also very excited that Rob is going to join us at Celosphere, our first global partner and user conference in April 2nd and 3rd. So we're very, very excited about this. And without further ado, I would turn it over to Rob to start the webinar.
Alex, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining today. Alex, thank you, and thank you for the positive feedback on the report. So this was this report was something of a labor of love, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the results of that research, a little bit about our broader process research and why process is so important to us. But this was about 6 months of testing hypotheses around this particular research and deep diving into a lot of customer case studies, a number of which came through Celonis. And thank you so much for putting us in touch with some of your customers as well. But I think maybe it's a little bit worthwhile just to get a sense of where this research came from and why this research has become so important, and then maybe just one more data point, Alex, I think, which is interesting, which is at Forrester, when we release a report, or actually at any time, our clients have the opportunity to talk to us, to have half-an-hour conversations with us. We call them inquiries on our research, to get a deeper dive and a more unique perspective. And this report has generated a lot of client interest and a lot of inquiries, which is always really good. It makes us think that we're in the right place. So maybe a step back as to why Forrester calibrates the research the way that we do, because I think it's incredibly relevant to why process mining is also coming to the forefront. So we work with business and technology leaders to develop customer-obsessed strategies that drive growth. Forrester believes that we are in an era called the age of the customer, where customers have unprecedented power to have input into not only which vendors they choose, but how those vendors serve them, how those vendors execute their strategy. And this, I think, is very highly aligned with this concept that we're going to talk about throughout the course of today's presentation, which is around digital transformation. So we'll get into all of those things, but I want to talk a little bit about around process, and what I'm referring to as big P and little P's in terms of the goals of process. And process itself, I think, is actually an interesting topic. So I think when we think about process and process automation, we do tend to think about it in terms of this concept of the big P as opposed to the little p. And the little p's are the massive amount of processes that actually run your organization. So I promised I'd talk about digital transformation, and we're going to talk about it a lot. And it's a great term, and at the same time, it's a terrible term. So, when we ask the question, what is digital transformation? Is it nothing more than the buzzword du jour? the answer to that is kind of yes. There's a little bit of a thumbs up associated with, oh, please don't give me any more information about digital transformation. Every vendor claims that they are the solution to your digital transformation efforts. Every services firm knows exactly what you need to do in order to get to digital transformation. And so it's becoming heavily overused. But I would say this about digital transformation. When I talk to Forrester clients, when my colleagues talk to clients, there is a common definition, and it's a common definition about digitizing things that are currently manual in the service of end-to-end automation. If we get back to the concept of the age of the customer, digitizing for agility, digitizing to better serve customers, digitizing to give a fully automated experience to your customers, that is something that folks understand. So it's overused, but at the same time, there is a fairly common definition, at least in terms of what the chief digital officer is being asked to do within Forrester clients, at least in terms of what the process professional or the customer experience professional is meaning when they say digital transformation. On the thumbs down side of digital transformation, the other thing I think that we can really clearly state at this point is that many, probably most, actually the data says most, digital transformation efforts are failing. So we began this journey a while ago, several years ago. The term came into vogue. People hired the chief digital officer. Unfortunately, what they tended to do was say, we need to build you a new website. I need to go hire my friends over at this agency. They're going to build you a really, really great mobile application, and then you will be digitally transformed. If your cab company has an application that looks like Uber, you will be Uber. And the answer was, that was not the case. That did not move the needle on digital transformation. That did not change the customer experience. And so we're taking a step back and saying, what's gone so terribly wrong here? And what seems to be going so terribly wrong is complete lack of attention to how the company operates beyond the veneer that the customer sees, beyond that basic experience, which if you build a great mobile application, you build a great front-end application, we like to refer to that as the digital illusion. So what has to happen on this concept of the big P versus the little p? If you talk about process, you almost immediately end up on the topic of business process management. You almost immediately end up around these really large, really complex processes that execute within a company, and the companies that have always gone about automating those, and they've done a fantastic job. They've done great work. But the way a BPM project generally used to execute was, you brought in the expensive product, you brought in the expensive services, you brought all your Lean Six Sigmas to bear. You took a great deal of effort in detailing the process as it exists today to the extent that you were able to do that. You looked at automating that. You brought in the business stakeholders. You were months and months into the process at this point. You began building automation software. You had the big bang launch, and voila, you had a new claims process, or voila, you had a new loan process, or voila, you had a new mortgage process. And that was great. These were really, really successful projects. But that's not what the customer is experiencing. So we have this concept of turning the aircraft carrier, which is kind of the big P of how we used to think about process. And now what we need to start thinking about is probably thousands of processes. I hate to sort of say it, but there's probably thousands of processes in your organization that have to be reconsidered in terms of getting to digital transformation. And the job of turning a whole bunch of speedboats at the same time is just fundamentally different than the job of turning an aircraft carrier. But this is what we need to think about doing. It's just really complicated to think about how you go about addressing this. So with that in mind, process mining brings two key things to the table, and they're very critical. The first is objectivity. We don't know how our organizations run. We simply don't. We think we do, but we don't. One of the case studies I'm going to talk about that we highlighted in the research, which you'll have available to you, clearly indicates that a large chemical company did not know how their company ran. And when they brought multiple people into the room, they could not drive consensus. But probably more importantly, in terms of automation, what process mining gives you is direction. So not only are you able to establish an objective baseline, but within that objective baseline, you start to see what are the thousands of things that need to be addressed. And how do I go about prioritizing those? Prioritization for the last decade or more has been the loudest person with the most political clout, or more likely, the department that has the discretionary budget can go out and automate. That's really not going to work. You have to think about things in terms of a much broader, holistic goal. And until you understand the inventory of everything you're trying to bite off here, you're not going to have the direction you need to drive towards digital transformation. So, hence, process mining is really hot. Process mining is suddenly something that everybody is interested in. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I bet there's a lot of people on this webinar, because every time we talk about this topic, we get huge audiences, and the documents, the first document we put out on this topic in a while drove huge readership. So, interesting. Some of our clients, some of the folks on this call are probably in Europe, and some of the folks in this call are probably in North America, and there's probably folks from other regions as well. But I've been fascinated by the difference between the understanding of process mining for our European clients and the understanding of process mining for our North American clients. So let's take a step back. Digital transformation, hot new buzzword, a whole bunch of new process automation technologies coming to the table. What is the history of these things, and do they work, and can you trust them? And what's been really gratifying around this has been diving in deeper and deeper and seeing how long this technology has been successful. So for those of you who are less familiar with process mining, this is a technology that actually began well over a decade ago, almost 20 years ago, around the combination of process improvement and analytics, data analytics, and pulling these two worlds together. Most of it came out of Eindhoven University of Technology. Almost about 2/3 of the companies that I talked to have their roots there. And the focus was initially around process improvement in manufacturing environments and discovery of how these environments operate and how they can operate more efficiently. So an older technology, a well-proven technology, and then it moves forward into the area of compliance and audit. So auditors begin to realize, wow, this is not unique to manufacturing. These things go into these systems. They understand the steps. They query the log files, and they pull information out that can be used in anything, of course, across your business. So can I go in and do an audit and make sure that you're actually adhering to the standards and practices that you are supposed to be adhering to? And the auditors begin to bring them in, and that is followed by companies in their accounting departments in different areas that get audited, bringing in the technology. So, further proof of the technology. And now we've moved on to this next step around enhancement. Can I do things fundamentally better than I do them? And do I need to do things fundamentally better because the market is demanding that I do things fundamentally better? Alex, are you on mute right now? Or can I ask you a question?
I'm here. Sure, I'm here.
Can you give us a background of your how you got into process mining and how long you've been in it? I hate to put you on the spot.
Absolutely, we've been no problem at all. We've been in it for almost a decade as well. I mean, probably 8 to 9 years since we started. And we started by we basically we had a project where we wanted to help a customer improve their customer service. So it's exactly what you said, right? They wanted to have a customer obsessed strategy, they needed around 5 days to handle customer service tickets, and they wanted to reduce that to 1 day. So they wanted to reduce it to handle customer service tickets within 24 hours. And we went in and we tried, to help this client. We thought, let's first understand and get a baseline understanding of how they do customer service and why it takes 5 days. And then we found out that is incredibly hard. It's exactly the things you talked about. Everybody had a different opinion. They didn't match. Nobody could tell us why it takes 5 days. Nobody could tell us how things should be handled, how things were done in reality. And then we did what you said. We found out about Will van der Aals and Eindhoven University and the research around process mining. There was a lot of research at the time. I mean, now it has been obviously much more, but there was a good set of research at the time. And then we built this into a product, and showed them their as-is processes. They became our first customer. They will actually be at our conference as well in April. And then the second customer was actually focused on compliance. So it was Siemens, and they were using it in the audit department to understand where they have gaps in auditing. And really those were our first customers. And then we started a company. And now obviously the company's grown a lot since then. But yeah, it's been around 8 to 9 years.
And so, long history and again, the pattern being kind of consistent. And this kind of last one so as we move forward in this presentation, I'm going to focus on this last piece around enhancement, right? Because enhancement is really, I think, where the heat is, and where this is kind of moving from, well-proven technology that handles some use cases extremely well to something that we think has to really become pervasive in terms of digital transformation strategies. So with that in mind, this is actually this is a graphic that didn't make it into the report because we just decided it took up too much space. But I thought it was worth mentioning here as well. I started off by saying, when we dig into the long-standing customers around process mining, you see a great deal of heat around Central Europe, and you see a great deal of heat around Central Europe for a couple of reasons. One, I think, is the emanation of the technology from the University of Eindhoven and the great minds that kind of took that forward from that research. And the other is the incredible amount of attention to process excellence as relates to manufacturing in Germany as one sort of source. So when we talk to European clients, again, they come in with a baseline often of understanding what process mining is. But what really kind of got us to say, well, wow, there's something really shifting here. There's something very different that's driving this shift. Was one, a shift in the calls from Europe to North America, and secondly, a shift in the industry. So when we started getting calls from North America, the first thing we got was a lot of calls from people saying, what is it? How does it work? What is the technology that sits behind it? And the second piece, because there was just fundamentally less familiarity with the technology in North America. And the second was the industries. And the industries were financial services, insurance. There was almost always a reference to something that touches a customer, something around customer experience, and almost always some conversation either around end-to-end automation or around digital transformation. So so this shift is what caused us to say, something really critical is happening here. We have to spend a lot more time doing the research. That's what kicked off this 6-month project of really trying to dig in deeper. Alex, does this match what Celonis's business looks like? Are you seeing similar types of trends here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we started in Germany. Obviously, we work with many manufacturers, and we still do. It's still a great play for us. But we've set up our US operation, and it's been growing like crazy. We now have 5 offices in the US, and work with many customers. And you're right. I mean, I think financial services has been a strong focus. We see a lot of demand there, and also really looking at these customer facing business processes to think if we are going to compete with digital native companies like Amazon and Google, and many companies don't know who they will compete with in 10 years from now. We really have to make sure that we deliver world-class customer experience, because customers expect that from us. So I can fully echo this, and I think
Yeah.
this
Piece that I would also say, which is a little bit harder to capture on a graphic, is the calls that are coming in from North America. There's a very real fear factor associated with them. The calls that I'm getting are, those digital natives they have destroyed industries. They have taken over industries, and we think we're next. Like we really fear that we could be the next company that gets overrun by a digital native that is completely unexpected in terms of our normal competitors. So some numbers here just in terms of what is driving process improvement initiatives. We love our data at Forrester, and so you've heard me talk a lot about these things, but I want to root this in data. So this is a survey we do every 2 years, and it largely gets fielded to people who are interested in process. So take the data with a grain of salt and understand that these are process professionals who are responding to this. But I want to do 2 things. I want to follow the red line from the top, and we do trend this data every 2 years. But the way we actually ask the question is we ask them, tell us what you were focused on 2 years ago. Tell us what you're focused on now, which is the middle column, and tell us where your focus is going to be in 2 years. And look at the drop off on cost reduction. So process improvement, that traditional BPM large scale project, was all about cost reduction. This is the line. This red line is the line that built the traditional BPM market. And you see that falling from 32% to 16% now as the primary driver to 8%. Accelerate digital business transformation. Again, a lot of ways that you could interpret this, but a very clear trend line that goes up from 13% 2 years ago to 32% now, to 49% 2 years from now. I want to make 2 comments about this slide before I get off this slide. So number one, there's a bunch of smart people listening to this webinar. Everything in the left column is completely intertwined. We ask them, what is the primary driver? How are you going about justifying this investment? How are you going about justifying your existence within the organization? And what are your KPIs? What are your key performance indicators tied to? So if you're accelerating digital transformation, you're going to reduce costs. You're going to improve worker productivity. You're going to probably have a huge focus on customer experience. You're going to be laying in foundational capabilities that drive regulatory compliance. But the primary driver is around business transformation. That is the term, and that is the goal that they're driving towards, and that's where the strategic alignment with the organizational objectives lies. And so you've got that trend line going up. The other comment I want to make about this is this didn't change from one survey to the next. Did not change, which means the goals have remained the same. The progress has been 0. They're making very little progress on getting towards digital transformation as relates to process improvement. A side piece that we're going to talk about a little bit as we go through the case studies and onward is this concept of our customers increasingly, process professionals again, using customer journey mapping as the way that they want to actually identify process optimization and automation. This is a subtle change, but it's a really big change. If you think about the experience of a customer from beginning to end, I found you, I'm finding out more information, I'm engaging, I want to buy your product, I'm now being exposed to all of the ways that you go about delivering that product, whether it's whether you're shipping me a watch, or you're getting me an insurance policy, or you're onboarding me for a loan, or you are further in the process and handling a claim in an insurance environment, all of the steps in that end in an end-to-end customer experience. And if you think about the previous slide and how we talked about cost takeout, those big bang BPM projects could take cost out silo by silo. But at the same time, there could be 1,000 processes that work between those silos, or 1,000 exceptions that happen outside of those silos that are not addressed, that are actually affecting the customer journey. So if cost takeout is your primary objective, you can declare victory. I met my KPIs. I got my bonus. I had lower errors. We generated this piece faster. But unless you're thinking about it holistically in an end-to-end state, you may not be changing how the customer is experiencing your company, your organization, or the patient in the case of healthcare, or the citizen in the case of government, or the employee in the case of an employee journey. Another kind of key thing here is just the role of design thinking. So design thinking to us indicates that these things are increasingly actually being exposed directly to customers, directly to patients and citizens, et cetera. So, an important side piece. But the customer journey mapping thing, a really, really big data point. And if you look at the data here, 57% are increasing and 26% are significantly increasing. So the number is actually really large. And it represents a fundamental shift from the technologies that, were probably in play before, which were probably BPMN, business process management notation tools, mapping notation tools being used to actually drive the automation efforts. Now those things increasingly having to align with what the journey is doing and what's happening within the world of the customer experience professional. So what goes wrong? Why are so many of these things failing? Is that the customer journey? All right, so you're at the top, right? You're doing your digital transformation thing, and you've built the new mobile app. But the mobile app has a wait state while somebody's figuring out whether to approve something. The mobile app has a wait state while some batch process runs. The mobile app has a wait state while some fundamentally inefficient process is happening. So you just aren't doing things the way digital natives are doing them. So what the customer sees, what we often think about in terms of customer experience, click here, what does this look like? Do I get confused? But then what happens below the waterline? The operational processes happen below the waterline. The customer journey largely, especially in complex environments, especially in the environments where we see the heat of this emerging, around financial services, banking, and insurance, those operational processes actually are what the customer is experiencing. And if they're not automated, it could be just awful, right? So we're gonna introduce a bit of a boogeyman here in terms of this thinking, and we'll talk about this in terms of folks who want to compete with Amazon. So we were asked to do some research around the role of artificial intelligence in retail, and this was a result of Amazon launching the Go Store, and this was research I did with a colleague, Sucharita Kadali, who's in our retail area. And what we came around to was, look, there's all kinds of really great, fancy things that you could invest in. You can invest in new Alexa skills. You can invest in new mobile apps. You can invest in new ways of interacting, even as radical as a store, where you don't have to actually go through a check through a register. You actually just walk out with the product. All of those are really great, but they're all built upon a deep, deep level of automation that lives below the surface. How do you handle those transactions? How automated are they? What is your role in recommending product? What is your role in fulfilling? How do you manage inventory, logistics, and all these things happen differently, obviously, if there's not product involved, but specifically within the Amazon retail world, every time they introduce some great new interface, some great new customer experience, It's on top of an automated company. We'll get to one of the case studies that we had, and they echoed this directly. Everybody wants to go off and build an Alexa skill on top of a fundamentally non-automated customer experience. It's just a recipe for disaster. So this is one of many examples, and we'll pick on Amazon a little bit more because they do this extremely well. And this is, the name Amazon comes up a lot in terms of that fear associated with what our customers are facing. Some quick numbers just around the sheer enormity of what is not automated within your organization. How many processes are running in a fundamentally non-automated way? And at the top, you have packaged applications. So, a lot of processes are running within packaged applications. Part of the domain of where Celonis and other process mining vendors have lived is within these silos. Can you drive greater levels of optimization? Can you drive greater levels of visibility? And that's terrific. Increasingly, what we want to do though is think about, can we drive optimization across those packages? Can we do it across multiple environments? So that's what's emerging now. I'm automated. I'm running SAP. I'm running Oracle. That's great. But am I doing it effectively within that application? Am I doing it effectively as that application touches other applications, which is very likely in the case of a customer journey? And then there's all this other stuff, right? So what we then find is, okay, we've automated the happy path. We've turned the aircraft carrier, but there are, literally 1,000 or 1,500 additional processes that we have to think about that are happening in things like spreadsheets. I run a macro, I change a few numbers, I forward it on to the next person, they do some information, they input some information here, they change some information there, and they move it on. A lot of how companies run is just like this. Not how Amazon runs, by the way, but a lot of how traditional companies have always run has been around these types of electronic manual routing environments. And then, of course, there's paper-based and manual routing of processes, which are also ripe to be replaced and refactored, and where you can have much, much greater levels of automation if you know where they are and if you know how to go about prioritizing removing these things. The numbers here are big in terms of percentages here. The numbers here in terms of the inventory, the backlog that can be created around the things that need to be automated is actually really, really large, really daunting, and really requires deep insight and as well as attention to prioritization. So we see this big move out towards what we call the business developer zone. So the few things that IT was running, the highly controlled applications, that's great. We're still going to do those things. They're very, very important. But increasingly, the visibility into what happens in the rest of my organization, there's a whole bunch of things. We can throw a whole bunch of technology at these things, right? This is where digital transformation happens. And we can use digital process automation technologies. Content has process capabilities. We see increasingly automation being driven through low code, robotic process automation, red hot in terms of automation opportunities, business rules, decisioning, AI. Let's forget all those technologies on the right and just say most, if not all of those, are probably going to be in your toolkit of how you go about automating. Let's just figure out what you're going to automate first. Let's not start throwing tools at this before we figure out what the heck our roadmap looks like. So, if we think about, again, that aircraft carrier versus the speedboat, those deep structured methodical processes, the really large big bag processes that we always focused on, we could figure those out, albeit poorly, right? We got it wrong a lot. Let's also be honest. A lot of those big projects, we didn't scope them. We didn't analyze them as well as we could have. We didn't have as good of an objective baseline as we would have wanted. But as we get out to the long tail of things that now requires automation, forget it. There's no way you're going to do this manually. And in a moment, we'll get into the case studies, and we'll talk about within those case studies where we've seen challenges and then ultimately success in addressing that long tail of automation that's required. So in terms of the complexity of process, how we are actually really calibrating our process research at this point, we've put this stake in the ground that says the first thing you do is you think about process mining in terms of identifying how your processes run today, that manually you're not going to be able to do it. You start there. You align with what the customer journey looks like. This is going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to get the process professionals in the same room as the IT professionals, in the same room as the Six Sigmas, and in the same room as the technology professionals. And they probably aren't used to being in the same room together. But your digital native firms are certainly used to having them in the same room together. So that's the organizational challenge. You have this huge issue of prioritization, standardization. How do I go about addressing what needs to be done? And then you're going to automate. You're going to do a lot of automation. And that automation is going to change things. And it's going to create new opportunities for process optimization. So as you're monitoring it and optimizing it, you go back into process mining to find out, A, is it working the way expected to? And B, can we do this more effectively? So this is a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't necessarily always think of in terms of our traditional, your dad's BPM research. We didn't think about process mining. We didn't think about alignment with customer journey, and we didn't think about constant monitoring and optimizing. We really put a focus on, hey, you got a big problem, go automate it. So a very different set of capabilities, and we believe that process mining creates that baseline and starting point for how you do that. I'm going to quickly go through 3 case studies, and we'll leave a little bit of time for questions at the end, because I know this is a lot of information. And these 3 case studies, I'm going to talk through them, and they're also in the research document that you'll have available for you. But I think that the one thing that came through in terms of the people we talked to was 3 things that were important to them: customers, customers, and customers. They all had a razor sharp focus on customers and customer experience. So the first one is Schukat Electronics, and I'm just going to kind of start this by saying this started with George Schukat. He's the founder and CEO of this company, and often we see that when these things are successful, they're being driven by the top down. It's amazing when the CEO gets involved, what level of organizational alignment you can drive and how quickly you can drive it. So George was very visionary, and what was really keeping George up at night was this margin erosion. So, in a manufacturing environment, you are always subject to somebody who does it faster and more efficiently and can drive your margins down. And this does not benefit the smaller companies as relate to the larger companies. See Amazon and the world of retail. Get on board with us or we'll crush you. So he wasn't fond of this concept of margin erosion. And with that in mind, he understood that margin erosion meant lower prices, and that was one way to make customers happy. But actually, there was a better way for him to think about how his company could make customers happy. And it really required a deep forensic understanding of how his company operated today. So what he looked at was, if I could put the product into the hands of the customer at the exact right time that they need it, not as quickly as possible. Sometimes the answer to that was, I can get you the product as quickly as possible. Sometimes the answer to that was, I can get the product into your manufacturing line at the exact moment you need it. So you don't have to warehouse it ahead of time, and you don't have to have your manufacturing line waiting for it. So great goal. We've all been looking at these types of just-in-time environments for a very, very long time. He realized that this was going to require a level of understanding in terms of how their supply chain worked and how they could change that supply chain to create a new paradigm for their customers. And in doing so, what they were actually able to do was create a differentiation that was so strong that they actually got out of that race to zero in terms of margin erosion. And the only way you could compete with your competition was to do it through price. He turned the scale of his competitors against them by having greater insight into how his organization ran and the things that really, truly mattered to his customers. But to meet those things that really, truly mattered to his customers, what he had to do was to actually rethink exactly every step of the process in terms of how they served their customers. And it was really complicated. As I'm sure there's supply chain people on the phone. These are incredibly complicated environments. By doing that, he was actually able to meet their objectives. He was actually able to do something that was unique to the market. Great Insights wasn't going to start without process mining. Wasn't going to start with the end state of I want to put product in the hands of my customers at exactly the right time. We've been trying to do that for a very long time without understanding all of the intricacies of how his supply chain worked. He'll now go and apply that to other parts of his business. The second one is Chemours. They're a division of DuPont, large chemical company. This one was interesting. So this was driven by a process professional. The woman that ran this was actually in charge of process improvement and process optimization, and that is often the people who drive these types of projects. Her problem was this: they were highly acquisitive. They were very, very disorganized in how processes ran across the organization. She wanted to get her arms around that. It was very, very chaotic. And then, being the process professional that she was, she brought everybody into the room and said, let's do a workshop and let's get to the bottom of this. And lo and behold, process became emotional. People did not agree. They became heated, and they were not able to drive to any baseline consensus as to where they stood today, which meant that they were not able to actually step forth to become more effective in their processes. She applied process mining in this environment. This is a baseline truth. Data can be beautiful, data can be ugly, but it's always truthful. And with that in mind, she can then put the charts up that says, this is how process mining data says we do our business today. And with that baseline truth with that established baseline truth in place, they were actually able to move forward on their process improvement initiatives. The last one, this was a large insurance company, and it was interesting because the senior vice president of new business development, new business and product development, that was in charge of this one, again a different role here than the other two. He had come from a banking environment that had been disrupted by a digital disruptor, and in his new job, he wanted to see that not become the case again. So he was looking to drive a radical level of automation in a very, very manual, paper-intensive environment, insurance. He actually used the term specifically, what keeps me up at night is Amazon coming in and entering our business. He also directly spoke to the fact that we do not become a disruptor by building a voice-based skill that works on Google Home or whatever shiny object there is out there. That's not what makes Amazon great. By the way, this is Rob made this logo. Amazon's not in the insurance business, but they might be. And as he described it was, what happens when something comes up in a recommendation page that says, would you like to sign up for the following, insurance? And in a matter of moments later, you've gone through that highly automated process, and you didn't have to meet with your insurance agent, and you didn't have to send in a whole bunch of paperwork that you normally don't have to send in, and things happened in real time. There weren't these multi-day manual wait states that were going on. It is the classic digital disruption that's happening, or that's disrupted so many organizations. And I do think we all do sort of think, what would happen if Amazon entered my business? Because they are really, really good at driving these levels of automation. First thing he had to go and look and say, how are we doing business today? He described the 300 people on the floor below me who handle manual conversations and interactions with customers and prospects, and what they do all day and how that could be automated. Because every time somebody was on the phone with somebody downstairs, something was fundamentally invisible to the system. It wasn't happening in an automated, straight-through processing way. And how do we go about doing that? Well, the first thing we do is we actually say, what the heck is out there? And the answer is an awful lot. And then how do we go about prioritizing that? So with process mining in place, he used process mining as his baseline for A, process improvement, but B, his automation prioritization. So he looked at it from a discovery perspective, which gave him the prioritized list of how they go about working on these things, to how they go about automating it. So these three use cases are all in your document that you'll have access to when we're done here. And I just want to leave you on move this Move this window away from the shared application. I've never seen this before. Hang on. I'm sorry. Literally something I've never seen before. It's just popped up in my GoToMeeting. Luckily, we're on the last slide. Okay, that's better. I don't know what it was. Anyway, based on the conversations with these customers, based on the research we've done over the last 6 months, a few things come clear. So first, focus on outcomes. Focus on outcomes. They could be customer, they could be patient, they could be citizen, they could be employee. This changes the conversation in a very fundamental way, and actually changes the way you think about process and where process is in your organization. For better or for worse, I would say this changes the conversation from the big P, the old way we thought about process, to all the little P's that are required around digital transformation, all the stuff that lives below that waterline, all those operational processes that potentially impact your customers, your patients, your citizens, or your employees. Start with process mining. Discover it, use it, establish baseline objectivity. A couple of comments I've made throughout the course of the presentation here today. This is mature technology. This works. And it is not incredibly complicated technology. This is technology that you can actually bring to bear in a reasonable amount of time at a reasonable price point, and will give you insights that will change the way you look at your automation. Driving end-to-end automation is the goal wherever that's logical, right? So we know that that's not always what every organization wants to do all the time, but to the extent possible, you're looking at automating. You're looking at where you have opportunities to automate processes that are currently manual. There was a very early conversation that went on around Amazon that said it's so automated that they'll never actually have a strong brand. They'll never actually have a strong tie to their customers because there is very little personal touch. Well, that just isn't true. There's a great deal of loyalty, there's a great deal of understanding of that brand, even though they do a great deal of automation. They can actually create those customer relationships in other ways. And then use process automation to drive this radical level of differentiation. The insurance company, I think, was a great example. Schukat was a great example. Automation and insight as a competitive advantage for you in the marketplace, to turn this against the potential disruptors. So with that in mind, I want to turn it back over to Alex and team and see if we have any questions.
Rob, thank you. That was an amazing presentation, very, very insightful, and there were actually a lot of questions. So, I would just start with the first one. So the first one is, what is the best strategy to identify the drivers in a company to minimize costs to the business?
I'm going to answer that, Alex, and then of course I think I'd love you to take a shot at it as well. Cost is actually pretty easy, right? So you look at areas where you have high levels of human interaction, and you look at areas where you have high levels of errors, and those are your cost takeout opportunities. Again, this has been BPM, right? This is what BPM did extremely well, was identify opportunities to take out those types of costs. At the same time you're doing that, though, again, the driver then moves towards for what purpose, right? To what end, right? And so what you're really trying to do then is to create a competitive differentiation based on that automation. And I want to be clear, everybody still measures cost. That slide with all the bars that went up and down and they said cost is no longer a primary driver. Everyone, even though it's not a primary driver, is measuring cost. They're measuring cost takeout. They're doing it because we've actually gotten really good at that. And certainly we want to understand that we're taking out cost, but it's not the primary driver. So, so I think these initiatives are being driven from higher and higher up in the company. They're being driven at a more strategic level. Cost is a consideration, but again, not the primary one.
No, and I would agree with that. I mean, I think that I like to talk about this concept of purpose-driven transformation, and whether it's process mining to start, and then automation technologies, all these changes that you make, it always has to be driven by a higher purpose, and that purpose often isn't cost, even though if cost might be part of the equation. So I fully agree with that. So let's go to the next question. So this one's an easy one. I will answer it. Would it be possible to access the presentation slides after the webinar? The answer is of course. Then there's been, and we will also share a recording of this webinar plus a link to the report that Forrester and Rob put out. So you will have all that access to all that information. So the next question is, hi, why is there such a strong focus on only automation? Why only automation?
Oh, I think that's because I'm being the hero of my own tale here, and so since my roots come from automation, and since I tend to view the world of process as technologies that drive automation, that I'm constantly focused on automation. But yes, I do realize that automation is not the only area of process improvement. I do think it's the one that is most disruptive right now. And I do think that companies that are able to drive more straight through processing in their interactions with customers I think there's a high alignment between that and the role of disruption in the marketplace. But yeah, I'm an automation guy, so I talk about automation a lot, and I do at the same time recognize that there is a lot of process improvement capabilities that do not have to do with automation. So that's probably my bad.
And Rob, I think what you did a very good job of kind of, I think it's also that if I want to add my 2 cents, I think it's also about what does automation mean, right? So I think you did a very good job at showing the different areas of automation, and for example, a lot of our customers look at their process and say, we need to change and fix our master data to increase straight through processing. So automation doesn't necessarily mean to bring in new automation tools. That's obviously a part of it, but also to fix the current automation that already exists within the system for years, etc. So I think I'd also always encourage people to take a broader lens on automation, and I think you showed this very well with a kind of traditional system and the last mile, and all these different tools. So,
hey, Alex, you mentioned master data. Master data is a lifeblood. It is in the DNA of automation, right? You can't automate data, so they all get intrinsically tied together.
Yeah, fully agree. So there's a lot of questions. So let me just go through. There's been some that are duplicate. This is actually when it came to types. Apart from customer experience, what about the innovations in the revenue model? So for example, instead of selling a car, selling miles, isn't that a very important aspect associated with digital transformation?
Yeah, and that's it's really funny because I was almost going to put that slide in at the last minute, and I did allude to the fact that once you understand your processes, and not until you understand your processes, can you really begin to understand the opportunity of doing things in a fundamentally different way. So that was the allusion I made when I mentioned that once you fully understand your processes, it can refactor the way that customers, suppliers, and communities interact with one another. We've actually done some great research. It was done by Ted Shadler and Nigel Fennick at Forrester, called Unleash Your Digital Predator. And within that is the idea that once these things are automated, once these things are digitized, it creates new opportunities for doing business in fundamentally different ways. So yeah, we take the role of innovation very, very seriously. I'm kind of the kale and Brussels sprouts, kind of eat your superfoods kind of guy that says, like, I'm the mom putting the food on the table that you don't want to eat, that says, look, until you understand how your business runs today, which is not as cool and sexy as as some of the new business models, you're not going to be able to actually embrace those business models. So you still got to go back and understand your processes, and then with that in place, you can start to build on those new types of business models. But I would argue that you better know how you do business today before you start thinking about how you want to change doing business.
Very good, very good. So fully agree. Let me see. So there's another one here. Maybe let's do this one. Yeah, So I was wondering if you could give a bit more insight into whether the circular diagram you showed earlier in the presentation, showing process mining at the top right, is an iterative process, or is this a one-off process, and how often organizations should follow this process?
It's iterative and it's ongoing. So the answer is it is increasingly something that you well. All right. First off, let's recognize the fact that we started this thing by saying you have thousands of processes, and those thousands of processes need to be discovered. And then whether you automate them or not, you're going to probably do something about them, and you can't go do those 1,000 processes in the course of a cycle. That's crazy. We are simply constrained in terms of the amount of change that we can absorb and the amount of automation that we can build. So it is very much iterative, but the advantage of iterative, we didn't get into the waterfall versus agile development methods, but people are actually starting way smaller, and the tools that we have available to us to actually do the automation allow us to do things way smaller. The insights we get from things like process mining give us the opportunity to identify small, high-value things that we can actually address very, very quickly. But the nature of that means it's going to take a very long time. And by the way, it's going to be changing along the way. So we do advocate smaller chunks, doing this in smaller pieces, and because you learn along the way. That's the monitoring and optimization part, and it never ends. This is just it, guys. This is business. This is constantly improving your business, and this is a mechanism for one of many for helping to constantly improve your business.
Great. Fully agree. There's a lot of questions, still getting more. So I'm going chronologically here. We didn't ask somebody to ask this, but read it anyway. Rob, is it Forrester's view that Celonis solution demonstrate clear leadership in process mining? What would you say differentiates Celonis in this space?
Oh gosh. I like to say I love all my children equally. There's a lot of vendors in the space who do things differently, and they do things well. And we don't, we have a very structured methodology called a wave, which we use to compare products, which we haven't applied to this space yet because we're a little early in the research. But I do, I would say this about Celonis. I think you guys are doing a lot of projects. You're doing a lot of work. You have a very strong history of success. None of this, to say that your competitors don't, but you've done a lot of really good work for a lot of really good clients. Everybody we talk to who's using your product is really, really happy with the results. And I think part of that is your depth of experience and the quality of your product. So, we'll revisit this conversation where I can actually have an objective basis and say, vendor A does this well, vendor B does this well. And I'll just leave it at Celonis does good work for their customers.
100%. Thank you. Okay, so last question, and then before we go into the last question, because that will probably be the last one we can cover. There's a lot more questions, and I would encourage everybody on the call to reach out to Forrester if you're a client, to reach out to Celonis, get your questions answered, and again, we will send this. So the next question is, you were saying that the U.S. financial sector is interested in process mining. Any compliance use cases that you could think of?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I would say sort of like the cost conversation. Compliance is part of every conversation that we talk to. So anytime you're talking about refactoring process, anytime you're talking about changing how business is done, particularly as relates to automating things, compliance is deep entrenched in those conversations. And then thing number two is obviously with folks trying to, so ongoing compliance issues, the U.S. very, very concerned, U.S. clients very, very concerned, and still trying to get their arms around GDPR. So, with that and other regulatory compliance coming down the line, a lot of these things are specific to compliance-related processes as well. So the answer is yes in the macro, and yes in as part of everything that our clients are looking at.
Great. Rob, thank you very much for this webinar, and thank you for everybody who attended. Again, we will share all this information and Rob will be joining us at Celonis, as I said, and you can download the report. So we're really excited about this. Work from Forrester, very insightful. There's probably 20 more questions, so there's been a lot of interest. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you, and let's try to get to all the questions we can, Alex. Thank you so much for everybody to joining, and thank you, the Celonis team, for having me.
Thank you.